The following is an interview with Professor Eve Dunbar of Vassar College, conducted by Lindsay Stewart at the Penn State University as part of the 2012 National Endowment for the Humanities Summer Institute on Contemporary African American Literature.
Okay, so thank you for being with us today, Dr. Dunbar.
Thank you.
Okay. How would you describe your approach to teaching African American literature as a tradition?
I really do teach it as a kind of tradition of movements. I think sometimes people will teach survey courses, because that's where I teach the tradition, through thematics. And that's a particular method that doesn't work for me, because I really want my students to have a sense of a kind of long history. And so we move through a kind of early period into slave narratives and slavery, post-emancipation, Reconstruction, Harlem, the Nader, Harlem Renaissance, mid-20th century modernism, into a kind of, I would never call it postmodern necessarily, but kind of contemporary. And now I've had to start adding, just because it's part of the discourse of the field, a kind of post-racial or post-black, if that exists, and what does literature in the 21st century look like. So it really is very history-based and literary movement-based.
Do you think your approach has changed over the years?
I think that it has, in a way. I think that I was more inclined very early to teach a thematics, so that I wanted to talk about sexuality in a section, so here are all the books where we can look at that. And what I was finding is that my students don't really have a sense of history. And so you can't talk about sexuality. We were having this conversation in seminar today. It's very difficult to talk about sexuality without a historical context of slavery, post-emancipation, respectability, if they don't understand what the historical stakes are. So that's why I moved back to a kind of traditions and history and historical movement-based approach.
So thinking about African American literature as a tradition, thinking about its history, what did you think of Ken Warren's proclamation that African American literature is over since segregation?
Ended. I think that my first inclination was to talk to my black friends who are writers, and one of my very close friends and colleagues is an African American writer, and he's from the South, and I forwarded him the email or the article that was in the Chronicle, I think. And I was like, oh, hey, what do you think about this? And we talked about it, and he was like, this is complete trash, because what does he think I'm doing? He's like, and, he's from Mississippi. He talks about what it means to be black and what it means to grow up in the Deep South. And so for me, it was really important to talk to actual writers and not critics, because we're period-based, we're movement-based. We don't produce, many of us don't produce the text, or texts like the ones we analyze. And so for a critic to say that a particular type of writing is dead means something very different to me than a writer who's writing in the moment, talking about what it means to write as a black person. So that was my first response.
So let's think about where African American literature is now, since it's not dead. What new trends or issues have interested you lately?
I've been sort of stuck in the mid-20th century for my own work. So I'm, at this moment, really coming into a contemporary space. And the thing that interests me now, the question that I have as a teacher and as a critic and a writer is literature relevant? Literature across the board, but African American literature in particular, because that's my field. Is it relevant when I'm teaching my courses? How do I get a group of young people who live in this technologically advanced world, who have, and you know, I guess I might have ADD too. It's really hard to sit down and read a book,
Yeah.
right? And finish a book. What would compel one to do that? So I have to think, or I just taught my course on African American Lit, the contemporary, the second half of the course, and it was really important for me to include film, to include music, to include some street lit or hip hop lit, pop fiction or genre fiction, because I'm really invested in thinking about what do people want to consume, read, what's going to get them thinking about the larger issues that I think literature gets at in a particular way. So that's the question that's sort of guiding me at the moment. Sort of how is literature relevant, and how is African American literature relevant to a group of young people?
So since you brought it up, could you speak a little bit more about how important bringing contemporary literature into the classroom is?
And by contemporary, you mean
graphic
sort of
novels,
urban, not like genre, not literary fiction necessarily.
Not necessarily.
I think it's really important because, again, I think students, I mean, I don't want to be consumer-based in my approach to teaching, but I do want to be able to not be burdened necessarily by the fact, and we were talking about this in seminar yesterday, the fact that my students haven't done the reading. And so I think it's important to bring into the classroom, I'm less concerned with quality, what one would traditionally consider quality of the prose, or quality of the ideas contained within the text, because I have faith that the students and I will be able to read and bring kind of elevated, if you will, ideas to any text. So it's been really important to me to incorporate some really plot-driven African American literature, which often takes the form of popular fiction. You know, after you've taught them Invisible Man, you have to, they're sort of overwhelmed, and what are the what's the payoff of finishing a big book like that? Well, the payoff is that we get to read something that might be a little bit more pleasurable for you to get through. And the ideas aren't going to be the same as Invisible Man. There are going to be other ideas present in the text that we can talk about. So I'm really, and I've taught a graphic novel before, which is quite difficult because image, text, blank space, the gutter, how do we read the gutter? What does it mean? So there's a lot of technical language that you are teaching someone when you teach a graphic novel. So it's just more tools in the arsenal. And that's what I see a lot of contemporary, non-traditional literary, or like non-literary fiction supplying. Not lack, but actually the development of new skills.
Genuinely thinking about the Institute, how did you prepare for your sessions?
It's really funny. I don't know if I prepared, if I was prepared for the students. We've been joking that I didn't need to show up necessarily because they've been they're so engaged. But what I did prepare, the way I prepared was to sort of reread because I spoke on hip hop fiction, but what I did was reread the primary text, but also begin to think about what are the possible stakes involved in what does it mean when hip hop fiction becomes an exportable representation, exportable to the world, exportable to other countries. And I really enjoyed being able to push myself in a direction that I hadn't gone prior to coming to the Institute.
Well, thank you for being with us today, Dr. Dunbar.
Thank you.